as we explore quantum body and beyond, one of the things that constantly comes up is the different approaches to understanding reality and the difference between the approaches of science and Eastern spirituality, particularly. So I thought today I'd share with you both approaches, science and spirituality, and what they have in common, if anything, and how they are different, which is obvious, but also how they could be complementarities to each other, complementary approaches, the scientific approach and the spiritual approach. So, first of all, science begins with the assumption that matter is fundamental. As I've said, matter is the ontological primitive of the universe, and then explains everything, the entire universe, as a interaction of force fields, atoms, molecules, gravity. Let's say that. It cannot explain mind. It cannot explain consciousness. That's, of course, called the hard problem of consciousness, although now there are a lot of scientific attempts to understand consciousness. So science begins with what I would call naive realism. That is, the so-called objective world is the real world because that's how we experience it. But remember, that objective world also includes the human body, and therefore study. It's like biology, physics, chemistry, biochemistry, and now quantum mechanics and mathematics all apply to the human body mind. Notwithstanding that, we cannot explain mind through the scientific method, which is called the hard problem of consciousness. Spirituality explores it totally differently, what we call reality. Instead of saying or asking what's out there, it says what is aware of what's out there. Not only what's out there, what's this, and what is aware of this. What is the mind, and what is aware of that? Who wants to know? What is the knowing element? If I move my hand, before I move my hand, I have an intention, and only then the motor cortex goes into activity. How does that intention trigger motor activity or sensory perception? Before I see, when I see something, hear something, how does that last step get orchestrated? From the neurochemistry in my sensory cortex to the experience of seeing or perceiving or whatever. So you see, there are two different approaches. One says what's happening and where is it happening? The other says who wants to know? What is it that knows experience, even the experience of asking the question, even the experience of what we call perceptual reality? Where is it? And so, as I've mentioned to you, I'm on a few WhatsApp groups where this discussion is going on incessantly to the point of exhaustion. The scientists never agree with the philosophers, or the spiritual people. The spiritual people never agree with the scientists, and they're using different modes of knowing, and they have different assumptions. One, that matter is the starting point of the universe, and the other, no, consciousness is the starting point of everything, because even matter is a perceptual activity in consciousness. We know matter through consciousness of mind. So let's look at a bit of the methodologies in these two areas. Neuroscience, which is the way scientists look at consciousness these days, primarily investigates the contents of experience. What you're listening to right now are the contents of my thinking. So we can call them contents of experience: thoughts, emotions, sensations, perceptions, etc. Neuroscience focuses on the neural correlates of consciousness, trying to understand how brain activity gives rise to these subjective experiences. On the other hand, Eastern wisdom traditions often approach consciousness as a fundamental field, an undifferentiated ground or source of awareness from which all experience arises, including the experience of that which we call the brain or the neural correlates. Eastern wisdom traditions emphasize the non-local and unitary nature of the underlying consciousness, this underlying consciousness, encompassing the knower, the modes of knowing, and the entities known as aspects of a single self. So here's a breakdown of some of the key differences. Neuroscience sees consciousness as an emergent property of complex neural interactions. Eastern traditions view consciousness as a fundamental reality, not dependent on physical processes. Neuroscience focuses and analyzes the mechanics of experience, seeking to explain how we perceive, think, and feel. Eastern traditions explore the nature of awareness itself, aiming to transcend individual experience and attain liberation from suffering. Then there's the concept of self. Neuroscience investigates the neural basis of self-awareness and what is called agency. Eastern traditions often challenge the concept of a separate, permanent self, seeing it as an illusion generated by the mind. And, these differences should not necessarily be seen as conflict, but rather as complementary perspectives on the fascinating mystery of our existence, because we would not know existence without awareness of existence. Recent advances in neuroscience exploring mindfulness and meditation practices are now suggesting a shared ground between scientific inquiry and Eastern traditions. Both fields are ultimately seeking to understand the nature of human experience and the relationship between mind and matter. So, I have addressed some of these issues also in my book, Super Brain, where I propose that consciousness isn't limited to the waking state, but encompasses deeper layers of awareness, such as dreaming and sleep. I've also expressed that consciousness is not a product of the brain, but an underlying field of pure awareness that permeates and animates everything, and that the individual self is a temporary construct arising within this field, influenced by thoughts, emotions, and perceptions. Our perception of reality is shaped by our individual filters and mental models, not by an objective absolute truth. Thoughts and beliefs create our experience of the world, forming a kind of illusion within the vastness of consciousness. This illusion can be challenged and transcended through practices like meditation, which allow us to tap into the deeper levels of awareness and recognize the interconnectedness of all things. So this is basically a chapter in my book called The Reality Illusion, for which I've been criticized by mainstream scientists, although now all the studies on neuroplasticity and epigenetics are kind of moving science in the direction of a deeper understanding of consciousness. The term that's used right now is panpsychism, which I don't like, which assumes still that matter is real. So panpsychism is not what I'm proposing. What I'm proposing is consciousness-only monism or Advaita. So, when people go through these practices, sometimes they also experience what is called the dark nights of the soul, when their ego identity is challenged. And that is a process we must all go through. Because it's like sitting at the edge of a black hole, the event horizon. And if you go across, you're not going to come back. And so you're not ready to jump into the abyss of the unknown as it appears to be, because it's scary and it's also infinite, and your ego self dissolves in that. And yet the residues of experience of the ego self remain, which then recycle and evolve to higher states of consciousness as well, ultimately to what we call moksha, or liberation from suffering. You jump into the abyss and you find your infinite self. And interestingly enough, the dark night of the soul then turns to ecstasy, to joy, which is at every level, every level, physical, emotional, spiritual, and even that which we perceive is always joyous. So let me end with a little poem I put together after reading all the songs of Solomon in the old Bible. So you can see these thoughts are not necessarily only Eastern. So the human has transcended and is in direct presence of the divine. Still refers to the divine as you, although the divine is also me. There's no you without I, the I principle as it's called. There's no I without you, Ubuntu as the African says. I am because you are. So here is this beautiful poem that I put together from various verses. You split me and you tore my heart open and you filled me with love. You poured your spirit into mine and I knew you as I know myself. My eyes are radiant with your light. My ears delight in your music. My nostrils are filled with your fragrance and my face is covered with your dew. You have made me see all things shining. You have made me see all things new. You have granted me perfect ease. And I have become like paradise. I am paradise. I am the divine self. Let me know what you think.